everyone. This is Ed Morrissey of HotAir.com, filling in for Hugh Hewitt today from the Relief Factor studios here in Central Texas. It's a glorious day. Steelers are playing the Browns tonight. I should mention that. It's a glorious night. It'll be a glorious night, but we've got a glorious morning here. All sorts of great topics. We've got great guests for you today. A little later in this hour, we'll be talking with Selena Zito about what's going on in Pennsylvania, where the recount of the Senate race is ongoing, and we've got lots to talk about the recount. There was a meeting in Bucks County, however, where basically it was a pretty even split in Bucks County between Donald Trump and Kamala Harris. I'm not exactly sure what the split was on the Senate race there, but it is a fairly competitive county. And just to set the stage here just a little bit, Bucks County is where Donald Trump filled in for a shift at McDonald's a few weeks ago and boosted his popularity, obviously raised the visibility of Bucks County, and so definitely wanted to compete there. And that, of course, helped Dave McCormick. Dave McCormick is the one who's running against the incumbent Senator Bob Casey. And right now, McCormick is ahead of Bob Casey by 16,400 votes, give or take a few now because of the recounts that have already been completed. There's been a massive shift in the count of, I think it's, let me check my notes here, single digits, because recounts don't move 16,000 votes. However, don't tell that to Bucks County Supervisor Diane Ellis Marsilia, who was insisting that she could break the law in order to save democracy or something. And let me tell you something, the people of Bucks County did not like that one bit. They didn't like it any better than the Pennsylvania Supreme Court liked it earlier this week. Of course, the Pennsylvania Supreme Court issued a ruling in bold capitalized letters saying, knock it off, basically. They were not happy at all. Unanimous decision to reinforce their earlier rulings that you can't count misdated or undated ballots. Those are invalid, and that anybody who says that they can do that is breaking the law, and that includes one Diane Ellis Marsilia. Now, Scott Pressler has done some fine work in Pennsylvania, as in other places as well, to help clean up the voter rolls, to help ensure fair elections, and he was working his rear end off in Pennsylvania this cycle, and he ended up in Bucks County at the Board of Supervisors meeting and had a few things to say for Diane Ellis Marsilia and the other commissioners on that board, and I think we have that in cut number 6. Let's go to that meeting.
Good morning. Bucks County has been in the news a lot this year. Earlier, we flipped Bucks County from blue to red, and for the first time in modern history, there are more registered Republicans than Democrats here in this county. Number 2, voters were disenfranchised in this county, and in fact, I want to thank Chairman Michael Whatley of the RNC and co-chair Laura Trump for suing to make sure that we had 3 additional days of early in-person voting, because voters waiting in line to do in-person, on-demand, mail-in voting were told that they couldn't vote until 5 o'clock, that the line was cut off. So thank you to the Republican Party for suing Bucks County and fighting for election integrity. And now, here before us, it's on the world stage that we have a commissioner, quote, by Diane Marsiglia, precedent by a court doesn't matter anymore in this country. People violate laws any time they want. And if I, meaning Diane Marsiglia, violate this law, it's because I want a court to pay attention to it. Well, Commissioner, the court already ruled that undated and misdated mail-in ballots could not be counted. You knew that going into the meeting. And I want to congratulate the people of the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. This speech I'm doing right now is going to be seen by millions across the country, the Commonwealth, and the world. And I have a message. Congratulations to President-elect Donald J. Trump, the 45th and 47th President of the United States of America. Congratulations to Senator-elect Dave McCormick, and we are not going to allow Democrats to steal this seat from us. Furthermore, congratulations because we defeated Matt Cartwright, giving President Trump an additional seat in Congress. Congratulations to Congressman-elect Rob Bresnahan. Congratulations to Congressman-elect Ryan McKenzie, defeating Democrats Susan Wild in Allentown and Lehigh. And I have a message. Peacefully, we are coming for your seat in 2027. If you don't resign today,
have at it.
I am coming for your seat peacefully. And Harvey, Commissioner Harvey, this goes for you too. You are complicit. Mark Elias and his cronies must be disbarred from practicing law in Pennsylvania, any of his cronies, for the misconduct that they did. I want you to know that I am going to spend all of my time in Bucks County for the next 3 years making sure that we take back this county. Thank you to every single patriot that showed up today.
How can you not love this kid?
Hey, that's a mic drop moment, right?
Oh, it's the best thing
I'm
in
in
the world.
radio. I'm in radio. I know what a mic drop moment looks like. That's a mic drop moment. Yeah, it's the best thing in the world. Look, I mean, I'm a little concerned that it's going to be 3 years before she's up for re-election, though, Dwayne, because a lot of people can forget and the passions kind of cool off over 3 years. And I hope that we can replay this every once in a while, just to remind people in Bucks County of what's at stake. I mean, this is. At this meeting, Diane Ellis Marcelia went on to say, well, I didn't mean, that I was going to break the law.
I was taken out of context.
It was taken out of context. I was talking about these other ballots, not those ballots. And she's talking about provisional ballots. So, I was talking about provisional ballots. Yeah, well, maybe so. But the idea is the same. You can't stand up as a public official and say, the law makes no difference to me. I'm going to do what I want. There were people out there who were holding up tyrant signs, and well, that might seem a little, a little passionate. That's exactly what a tyrant does: is they ignore the law and they just, impose their will. That's exactly what she was advocating when she said that, Dwayne.
Here's the thing about Board of Supervisors: if you know who a Board of Supervisor is by name, especially one in a different state, that's a bad thing, right?
It's a totally bad
That's
thing.
a
totally
thing.
bad thing.
If you are known,
you should be able to go into a grocery store as a commissioner on a board of supervisors, and nobody knows who you are.
Correct.
And that's how you know you're successful.
You're right.
If you go to a grocery store and everybody's pointing their fingers at you, then something has gone wrong.
If everybody's sneering,
very wrong.
everybody's sneering at you and pointing and saying, "She's the one in the video," you got problems.
Well, she's not the only one that's got problems. I mean, Bob Casey's got problems. And, Bob Casey's a little bit more famous. When you're a U.S. Senator, you do get recognized.
You mean election-denying Bob Casey, that one?
Election-denying Bob Casey, democracy-hating Bob Casey.
Yes.
Election-stealing Bob Casey. I don't really have a problem with recounts.
Insurrectionist Bob, that guy?
Insurrectionist Bob, yeah. Now, these were all the claims that Democrats were making about Republicans prior to this election who challenged elections, right? And I don't actually have a problem with recounts. Recounts are fine, as long as they're done honestly. There should be no issue with them because recounts don't usually change elections. I had a ringside seat for one of the biggest election challenges in American history, which was the Senate seat in Minnesota in 2008, and they spent 6 months challenging every single ballot that they could challenge, and finally they flipped that state, that Senate seat. To Franken. And do you know how many votes that all that did for the months that they were in court and going over those ballots? Do you know what the change was in that race? It was less than 550 votes. It just happened to be a dead heat at the end of it. There was 212 votes that separated Franken and Coleman at the end of that, and after all the challenges, it was 325, I believe, votes. It was less than 550 votes that changed. There are 16,400 votes in Pennsylvania separating Bob Casey and Dave McCormick. You can't get there via a recount. And the next phase is going to be an election challenge, but I mean that's
the dirty the dirty secret to what happened in Pennsylvania is there were a ton of ballots that cast Donald Trump at the top of the ballot and left the Senate ballot blank. There's a
Yeah.
there's a ton of undervotes where
71,000.
Yeah.
71,000 undervotes,
Yeah.
I believe, is what I saw. Yeah,
Yeah.
71,000. That's exactly it. That's exactly what
and
happened.
you can't go back and fill them in and say, well, they meant to do Bob Casey. It doesn't work that way.
No, it doesn't work that way. And they tried that though. Mark Elias tried that in Minnesota in 2008. So yes, they will make that argument. This is the dance, right? This isn't the dance I did when I was in high school, but this is the dance today, right? The Trump dance. This is the way that we're supposed to be doing it. I was trying to describe this to my wife, who was a little mystified as to what the Trump dance was all about. This is Ed Morrissey, of course, filling in for Hugh Hewitt. I'm managing editor at hotair.com. And I just want to talk to you a little bit about our friends at the Heritage Foundation. The American people spoke loudly on November 5th, and we want our country back was the rallying cry, along with the dance, And the election was a rebuke of a corrupt and incompetent elite uprooting our way of life, with so-called conservatives as guilty as their progressive counterparts. In an important new book, Dawn's Early Light, Heritage Foundation President Dr. Kevin Roberts announces the arrival of a new conservative movement. His message is simple: global elites, your time is up. His book charts a path for the American people to take back our country. And with a renewed sense of clarity and purpose, chapter by chapter, Dawn's Early Light identifies institutions conservatives need to build, others we need to take back, and others too corrupt to save. Ivy League colleges, the New York Times, FBI, NIH, Department of Education, BlackRock, and more. Dawn's Early Light is a blueprint for how we, the people, drain the swamp, take our country back, and keep it. I urge everyone listening to get a copy of this important book. Go to Amazon or wherever you get your books and buy Dawn's Early Light now by Dr. Kevin Roberts, Heritage Foundation. Heritage Foundation does some great work, and I know that they took some hits during this election, mainly from the mainstream press, with Project 2025. And look, the Heritage Foundation is an ideas group. It's a think tank. This is the type of thing that they do. It's no different from Brookings Institution on the center left, or the Center for American Progress on the further left. This is what think tanks do. And one of the things that I think is maybe an institution that just can't be saved is the mainstream media. I've taken to calling them protection racket media, because that's what they are. They're a protection racket. They're a protection racket for the far left. Not even for Democrats so much anymore, but they're a protection racket for the far left. We're going to talk about MSNBC a little later on in the show, so be sure to stay tuned for that. We've got to delve into the whole MSNBC thing, because I'm not necessarily sure that that's salvageable, and not just necessarily politically salvageable. It may not be economically, financially salvageable either. We'll talk about it. Like I said, we'll talk about it a little later on in the show, but Comcast is going to spin them off along with some of their other cable properties. And frankly, I'm not sure why an investor would want to invest in that spinoff. What would be the value there? They've lost half their audience. They've lost 100% of their credibility. And frankly, they're just probably irrelevant when it comes to both politics and entertainment. There just isn't a whole lot there. And we'll talk a little bit more about that later. But that's part of the institutional thing that we're talking about here. And the Department of Education has to be a big part of that, because they're really where sort of the locus of this elite takeover, I guess you can say, of American culture and American politics is centered. It's not where it started, because that started the elites, the Marxist elites seizing control of the colleges started long before 1979, 1980. It started in the 1950s and 1960s. But by giving them their own department and funneling all sorts of federal monies out to academia, and especially the Ivy Leagues, but not just the Ivy Leagues, the elite have managed to maintain and expand their grip on American politics and American media in particular. And they're never going to let it go. Not as long as the federal dollars keep flowing through there. So, Linda McMahon's been appointed to be the Secretary of Education, and they have some good plans there about school vouchers and using Pell Grants more broadly, maybe even into trade schools. There's lots of really interesting ideas that are going along here. But one of the things that you really have to think about, even before you get to those issues, is whether or not the Department of Education should just stop existing. And I'm hoping that Linda McMahon comes in there and works out a way that she can basically fire herself within a year or two. by simply disassembling the Department of Education. If Congress won't end the funding for it, won't unwind it through statute, then you just convert the money into block grants to the states and let the states and local communities decide what they want to do with the money, because that's the only way that you're going to get the federal government out of education. It's the only way you're going to pry the fingers of the elite off of the educational process. It has to return to the parents. It has to return to the local communities, and it has to put an end to the subsidies that are allowing the status quo to continue. Joining us now, I believe, is Selena Zito, who is, as always, reporting from the ground in America's heartland. And we're looking at, again, we were just mentioning this in the first segment, the recount in Pennsylvania U.S. Senate race. And Selena, welcome back to the show. Yeah, I'm not sure if we do have Selena. All right, we're double checking the technical stuff here. Of course, Selena Zito is a reporter for the New York Post, Washington Examiner. I think Selena's on with us now. Selena, welcome back.
Hi there. How are you?
I am doing good, man. We haven't talked in a while. It's good to hear your voice.
I know. It's been quite the year. That bumper music, though, man, it makes me think of that that meme with Trump and Elon Musk dancing to it.
Yeah, you know, I'm starting to learn this Trump dance. It's a pretty easy dance. This is the easiest dance I've ever had to learn, Selena. It's sweeping the nation too. I'm looking forward to seeing if anybody does it at the Steelers-Browns game tonight. By the way, I just want to work in a Pittsburgh Steelers mention here while I've got you on the air, because it happens so infrequently on the Hugh Hewitt show.
Well, he has a Pittsburgh Steeler problem. That's why.
All right, Selena. Well, obviously, the big story right now, of course, in Pennsylvania is this recount that's going on. A recount of an election that has a 16,400 vote gap, even in a state as large as Pennsylvania, is really, honestly, something of a waste of time and a waste of money. But doggone it, Bob Casey's going to do both.
Yeah, it's really, and these aren't even my words. These are words of Democrats across the state, including Bob Casey's, his father's lieutenant governor, Mark Singal, who served with his father for 2 terms and was actually Bob Casey Sr.'s, was the acting governor for 8 months when Bob Casey Sr. had the heart and liver transplant, has said it's time to go. There's no reason to put the state through this. There's no reason to cost the taxpayers this money, and they're really just sort of stunned that he has made this decision. And the scuttlebutt going on is that what if this isn't about knowing your recounting the votes? What if this is about setting precedent and weakening Pennsylvania's voter law? And that's the unfortunate sort of reaction that people are starting to have, because there's no logical reason for him to be doing this.
No, and look, I mean, I went through the Minnesota recount. You know, I was there for that. I wrote an extensive piece afterwards analyzing how the recount was handled, and that was one of the very few successful recounts in which the election result was changed. And I was just mentioning this in the first segment. The reason why is because the gap was only 212 votes to start off with, and the actual count only shifted about less than 550 votes. I forget what the exact number, but it was under 550 votes. So if you've got if you're within a couple of hundred votes, recount might make a difference. Yeah. But if you're at 16,400 votes, a recount is not going to change anything, because we're actually very, very good at counting ballots. Something we do very well in the United States. Every single state does it very well. You can argue about all the other processes, but the actual counting of ballots is done extremely accurately. And I think that Miami Herald, I went back and take a look at this. I believe it was the Miami Herald, analyzed the 3 successful recounts that had taken place since 2000 at that time. And the average shift of votes in a recount, in the successful recounts, right, the ones that actually changed election results, the average vote shift was 311 votes. And that's the
Yeah.
scope that you're looking at. So if you're at 16,000 votes, this is a waste of time. It's a waste of money.
Yeah, and Bob Casey he has been a statewide elected official in various positions, from auditor general to state auditor to state treasurer to U.S. senator since 1996. He could have left it with grace, and instead he's leaving this election looking like someone who is trying to steal an election, looks like someone who is a sore loser, and everything that people believed who they thought Bob Casey was. Oh, he's a nice guy. He's not a guy that goes on cable news and rages. Well, maybe he doesn't do that, but he certainly has changed the public's perception of character. And he's not the guy now that's going to be announced at not a Lincoln Day dinner, those are Republicans, a Jefferson Jackson dinner, and he comes and he speaks and people applaud him, and he'll get a nice speaking fee from some speaker bureau, and they'll name schools after him. Not now. That ship has sailed.
Yep. We were speaking with Selena Zito from Washington Examiner and New York Post, and among many other places where she contributes. Selena, on the ground in some of these recount counties, what are you? Obviously, you're hearing some of the things that you just said, right?
Right.
Do you think that is eroding any confidence in Josh Shapiro? Because Josh Shapiro kind of went into this process as one of the bench guys, right? He's one of the guys that could come off the bench in 2028. Do you think that this is eroding his standing in Pennsylvania?
So yeah, you're right. It is. He's Shapiro has always been viewed as a talented political athlete, and people thought it was very wise of him not to take that position as vice presidential nominee with Kamala Harris. And him not saying anything is not good for him. And here's why. I don't know if your audience is old enough to remember 2000, but in 2000, Ed Rendell, for a future Pennsylvania governor, was chairman of the DNC. He had already had 2 successive terms as Philadelphia's mayor, right? He was very popular. He was called America's mayor. And he told Al Gore December 13th of 2000, it's time to get out. He said it publicly. He called a press conference, and he forced Gore to get out. And people have a level of expectation that Shapiro should be doing something like that right now. And he's not. And I've been watching his Twitter feed, his official Twitter feed. And, he's putting things out of things he's doing, and rightly so. These are things he's doing, except he's getting fleeced with everything that he says, because people are saying, why are you not coming out on this? This is the guy that when there was a truck that caused a ramp on I-95 in Philadelphia to collapse, he was there within, I think, an hour, and within days that ramp was fixed, right? So, and when East Palestine happened, which was on the border of Pennsylvania and impacted Darlington Township in Pennsylvania, he was there the next day. So there's this, expectation that he is a guy that shows up and is good at governing. So not taking a more sort of stern role and a leadership role on this has hurt him. He did put out a statement about the Bucks County commissioners and their shenanigans earlier this week, but not really about Casey.
He did, and it was belated, though, right? I mean, it was actually a pretty good
belated.
statement about, but it was belated. It was after the Supreme Court had issued that rather stunning, bold capital letters, shall not be counted. Yeah, and with the concurrences is like, maybe you guys need to read English, but we've already ruled on this, and you're not supposed to be doing this. So it wasn't exactly a profiles and courage moment.
So glad you pointed that out. It was, and by the way, our state Supreme Court is 5-2 majority Democrat in my state, right?
Yeah.
And for them to put out a statement in all caps because, oh my God, people, we've told you this already. Don't do it. Stop doing it.
Yeah, I mean, it was a remarkable statement from the Supreme Court. Very much welcomed. We got about 30 seconds left, Selena. How long do you think that this recount's going to go? And is there any hope of any sort of shift here whatsoever for Casey?
Well, it shifted by one vote yesterday through I don't know how many counties. Sorry, it's just so absurd. It makes
well,
me
enough
laugh.
said.
It ends on Tuesday, and Tuesday will be the end. And Bob Casey will have lost again because he's already lost.
He's never going to get tired of the losing, Selena, just to borrow a phrase from Donald Trump. Selena Zito, Washington Examiner, New York Post, thank you so much for being with us. Trying to do the Trump dance to that bumper music just doesn't really work. That's from The Last of the Mohicans.
Oh,
I don't know that you can do the Trump dance to
you can do the Trump dance to anything.
Can you?
Oh,
Okay.
Donald Trump can do the Trump dance to anything.
Okay, Last of the Mohicans. This is a challenge. I want to see Donald Trump do the Trump dance to the Last of the Mohicans. I think this is great exercise, by the way, and it brings me to something I'm meaning to ask you about, because I know we talk about this when I'm guest hosting. You're looking trimmer all the time, my friend.
Thank you.
I know that you've been working with myphdweightloss.com. How's that working out for you?
It continues to work out really well. I've been able to keep the weight off I lost about 2 years ago, and going into Thanksgiving week, I've already now been committed to 2 different meals that I have to cook, or my wife and I have to cook. Our Bible study next Wednesday night is now going to be a potluck, and they committed me to making my homemade chili, which is very my PhD weight loss. That's very much in their game plan. That counts, by the way. That's a very heavy protein thing.
Does the cornbread that goes along with it? Does that?
I am not responsible for the cornbread that goes along with it, nor am I there to pray or bless it. Yes.
There you go. Okay.
But I think cornbread will be had. Then you've got the Thanksgiving meal, and I was just informed by the 2 miscellaneous random people that co-reside with me that we thought they were going to be in other places working, doing stuff on Thanksgiving Day. We were going to do it a different day, but they both came home and said, no, we want to actually spend Thanksgiving with you 2 this year. And it's like, oh, okay, I guess we're cooking then. So we got to plan a meal.
Well, all right. And my PhD weight loss, I mean, this is what they do, right? They help you plan meals out.
They teach you how to plan a meal and how to, once you've lost the weight, how to kind of make sure you navigate the carbs so that you don't pack it on during special occasions like this. 864-644-1900 is where you go to get more information. 864-644-1900, and tell them I sent you.
Tell them Dwayne sent you. And look, I went to the doctors yesterday, for my semi-annual Are You Still Alive meeting with the physician's assistant at my local clinic. I showed up and I was still alive. So, they're going to let me go off and do my thing. I was joking around with them, right? Because, when you're my age, I'm 61 years old, you have to do the obligatory lab draw a week before, right? So they can make sure that all of your chemistry is good. And they said, oh yeah, it's looking better. It's looking better, because I'm struggling with type 2 diabetes and different things, right? And he said, well, we're gonna have to do another lab draw. It's X date. And I said, good. Mark that down for early in the morning so I can go over to Burger King or Rosa's Cafe and get myself a really carb-heavy breakfast, because that's the one day I know I cheat that it won't show up on my A1C, right?
Yes, absolutely.
So tell me a little bit about cheating on my PhD weight loss. I mean, do they allow for that? Is there adjustment for
Well,
that? You get a couple of days
cheating,
to do that?
the cheating is carbs, and once you've lost, in the process of losing weight, you really minimize carbs, and they kind of crack down on you every time you cheat, because that's not how you lose weight, is by eating a bunch of carbs.
Right.
But once you've lost the weight and you're on maintaining, they kind of work with you over the several weeks to be able to find out what your body style reacts to carbs, so that you come up with your own index for roughly how many carbs you can eat a day and stay at a kind of a plateau, stay at an average weight. And once you have figured out how many carbs you can have, then it's like a spending account. It's like a flexible spending account of carbs. You can spend those carbs on whatever you want. It might be bread with dinner. It might be rice. It might be dessert. It might be chocolate. You can spend those carbs on whatever you want. Just you can't overdraw that account.
There is probably a penalty for early withdrawal in that sort of sense.
Yes.
You know, people tell me, I talk to them about being a type 2 diabetic, and certain things that I can't have anymore that I kind of dearly miss, like donuts, for one thing. I love donuts, right? And I always tell people, I say, what I discovered was that there is actually a lifetime maximum donut intake that you have, and I just hit mine at about age 33 and didn't know it. And that's part of the problem.
There is an absolute maximum quantity of donuts that you will eat in a lifetime, and some people hit that by 50.
Yes. Well, I think it was more like 33 in my case. But, of course, myphdweightloss.com, that's the program that you've been on for 2 years now?
A little over 2 years, yeah.
And it's still working for you.
Still works great.
Yeah, so this is a lifestyle change. This is not a a program, sort of I don't want to say fad diet, but I guess fad diet is what I'm reaching for. This is a program that teaches you how to eat better for the rest of your life.
Absolutely. It teaches you how to get back in the game and be a functional member of society where it's go time. You can go exercise. You can go do stuff. You can be active. You can do all sorts of things and not use weight as an excuse of why you can't participate in a lot of things. It's time to get in the game. We're going back to the 80s again. I mean, everybody's going to start moving. The economy's coming back. It's time to get back in the game. myphdweightloss.com.
The Trump dance is going to be there.
That counts as exercise. You can do the Trump dance if you want to do your exercise. There's no reason not to.
That's what you do if you want to work off some of those donuts. You start doing the Trump dance. The situation in Ukraine, which is escalating with the launch of an ICBM, and this is a direct follow-on from a decision by the Biden administration to take the leash off of the ATACMS missiles that we sent to Ukraine. We want to talk a little bit about that, and our next guest, Noah Rothman of National Review, might have something to say about that. But Noah, first off, great to see you again. Thank you so much for being with us today. And I do want to talk a little bit about where we're going with Donald Trump's cabinet picks, because I think that you had something to say last week that really resonated with me, which was that if you're looking at foreign policy, this is a little different than what maybe we expected. This is not necessarily a isolationist isn't really the right word, but a non-interventionist set of personnel. Marco Rubio is a pretty muscular guy when it comes to foreign policy, and he's going to be leading that effort. And I think that even caused a little bit of momentary alarm is probably too strong a word, but momentary hesitation by some of the people, some of the populists that have been backing Donald Trump, is that this is sort of an interesting signal that he's sending foreign policy-wise with these choices.
Yeah, with the caveat being that everybody who's been trying to get right with Donald Trump and his movement has twisted themselves into rhetorical knots over Ukraine. Nobody really knows what Donald Trump's position on Ukraine is. They know what J.D. Vance's position on Ukraine is, but Donald Trump himself has been more than a little ambiguous, and his signals, or his picks signal that ambiguity. Marco Rubio and Congressman Walz do not have the same worldview as you said, as, for example, Tulsi Gabbard. When it comes to Ukraine, they're all sort of scrambling, and Congressman Walz and Marco Rubio have been sending signals that don't make a lot of sense. They are incongruous with their coherent worldview. Tulsi Gabbard's worldview is 100% coherent. It does not shift with the political winds. She's what you would call a realist if you're being very, very, very charitable. But the others are projectionists, are to use the layman's terms, hawk. They prefer an America that is confident on the world stage, has an extroverted presence on the world stage, aggressively defends its interests and defines its interests, which is not necessarily something that Tulsi Gabbard has often done. And there's going to be a lot of conflict in particular over Ukraine. I suspect very less tension when it comes to, for example, Iran. But let's just take Iran for for one example. So I suspect that Donald Trump's cabinet will be very comfortable with supporting Israel as it degrades this constellation of terrorist groups that orbit around Tehran. But what about the Houthis? The Houthis are one of those terrorist groups, and they have mounted a challenge not necessarily to Israel, but to the United States. They're attacking maritime vessels in the Red Sea, in the Gulf of Aden, rising shipping costs, forcing those commercial interests to shadow Russian vessels and shadow Chinese vessels, because those are the only ones who will provide you cover in this environment. Joe Biden has not envisioned or pursued the kind of sustained kinetic action that would be necessary to reimpose stability in that region and to open up the Suez Canal, which is not something you can just abandon. There's no replacement for the Suez Canal. And this is sort of sustained action that I think the Trump administration 1.0 was leery of, and certainly Trump administration 2.0 hasn't really articulated the kind of cogent case for that sort of action that the American public will have to accept and have to ratify in order to pursue that course of action.
Yeah, let's stay with the Houthis for a second, because I have a thought on that. I mean, one of the problems I think that we created with this was pushing the Saudis to stop dealing with the Houthis, right? Because this was early in the Biden administration. We were threatening to suspend weapons, weapons sales to Saudi Arabia if they continued to fight the Houthis. It might just be as simple as Donald Trump comes in and takes the Saudis off the leash and says, "You guys go deal with these guys, and we've got your back while you're doing that." I think maybe the Saudis would even perhaps want to be part of that solution. It's certainly it's on their border, it's in their backyard, and maybe the solution there is to just get the Saudis to take back up what they were doing while Trump was in office the last time.
Possibly. It's certainly always better for every player in the region, Israel, Saudi Arabia, what have you, if the United States takes that off the board for them. They would much prefer the United States do this work for them than they do it themselves. And the problem with a democracy, just to steelman the argument, is that the American public does have to be comfortable with the way in which these operations are executed. And the Saudis, while I don't agree with the criticisms that were leveled of KSA by Bernie Sanders and others, the Saudis weren't conducting a sanitary military campaign. It was a pretty brutal military campaign,
yes.
As all military campaigns are, but this one had the brakes taken off entirely. And it's the sort of thing that erodes support for those operations rapidly, if not over a longer period of time. It's always preferable for the United States to do this sort of work because the United States does it well, does it surgically, has the capability to do it surgically, and removes from the equation the prospect of regional conflagration. The Saudis want to avoid a direct conflict with Iran. Iran wants to provoke as much conflict as it can with Saudi Arabia. That's beneficial for its domestic politics, to say nothing of conflict with Israel. And there are a lot of variables there. Maybe you're right. Maybe if it's just reinvigorating our relationship with the Saudis. We don't know whether or not the Saudis want to engage in another prolonged military campaign on the Arabian Peninsula, but it's possible. I don't think that's a sustainable long-term solution. I think the sustainable long-term solution is a very aggressive, prolonged, sustained bombing campaign to degrade the Houthis' capabilities to the degree that they can't maintain this campaign. Now, maybe they get resupplied by Iran over a quick period of time, but that's long enough of a period of time for us to introduce the assets necessary in the region to restore deterrence. Deterrence is broken down, and there's only one way to restore it, and that is to raise the cost of aggressive action beyond the point at which an adversary is willing to absorb them.
Well, no, and that's what Israel's been doing, right, over the last year, is reestablishing its deterrence. And really the solution that we're talking about in terms of the Houthis is the same solution we're talking about in terms of Hezbollah and Hamas, which is to deal with Iran. And I think you're right that this incoming administration is going to be very clear-eyed and very focused on Iran. It may not be their top priority. I think China's really going to be their top priority. and perhaps it should be, but I think Iran's going to be right up there, and that's one thing that I think that we can look at that will be a massive change from the last 4 years, which was sort of Iranophile rather than dealing with the threat that actually Iran is.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. No, it was, I think, just 3 months before the October 7th attacks that the last of these very obsequious overtures to Iran to get it back into the JCPOA came from the Biden administration, which was, if I recall correctly, to simplify it, basically allowing Iraqi banks to launder foreign funds so that Tehran could access those funds. It was to pay for, electricity transfers, as I recall. But it was just an effort to launder foreign money and get it into Tehran's hands. That was the course of this administration for the first 3 years of it before October 7th. Now, to be fair, October 7th put the brakes on a lot of that. This administration had the scales fall from its eyes to a certain degree after October 7th. It was already past the point at which the damage had been done and too much time had been wasted to get back to that period. But I don't know if maximum pressure is the sort of thing that you can just restart. Maximum pressure was a great policy for its time. I think that time has largely passed. What we've seen over the course of the Biden administration is profoundly chilling. The ballistic missile attacks on Israel in October and April of this year demonstrated that Iran has the capacity to deliver a fissionable device above an Israeli city. It can penetrate Israeli air defenses. It can put a device over Tel Aviv. October 7th demonstrated that it has the will to exercise its genocidal campaign against Jews. I don't think we get to the point at which Israel can break out, Iran can break out, gets close to a breakout point, and we can accept that. The United States will have to act. And I don't think Israel can do it alone. We would have to support them logistically over the air over Iraq. And if we were smart, we would want to avoid a regional conflagration, and we would probably take that off the table entirely for Israel and do the work ourselves. But the point at which we can just simply twiddle our thumbs and say, well, this is a problem for another day is rapidly dwindling. This will be a problem for this administration, and this administration will have to either neutralize Iranian nuclear capabilities, or it will have to envision a world in which Iran has a bomb and could deliver it to Israel, either directly or via proxies. And that's a far more dangerous world than what I'm willing to contemplate.
I would like to point out, too, and I mentioned this to Adam before we went on the air, you could also invest your money in taping a banana to a wall, I guess, because there was a art installation, and I really should use scare quotes here, art installation that sold for $6.2 million, and the art installation was literally a banana duct taped to a wall. And somebody used cryptocurrency to spend $6.2 million to buy that. And I'm wondering what happens when the banana goes soft. It's been bothering me all morning. It's like, well, I see the picture of it when it was first taped up there, but bananas don't last, man. $6.2 million. There's if you're watching us on the video, that's art. That's modern art. That's exactly what somebody paid $6.2 million for. You could get it for 20 cents if you go to the grocery store and buy a roll of duct tape. The cost of the piece of the duct tape, I would guess, maybe a buck. Maybe a buck, I don't know. And, in Roosevelt's time, it would have been 5 cents if they even had duct tape back then. It's just, to me, there's so much nonsense about art and value. Gold, gold's always valuable, man. It's like land. You may be able to find a little bit more gold, but they aren't making any more land either. So gold and land, those are your silver. Precious metals and land. That's where you go. Not don't put your money in bananas duct taped to walls. I think that's a bad investment choice. And speaking of bad investment choices, guess what investors are going to get an opportunity to invest in? MSNBC. We're going to be talking about this for the rest of this segment and the next segment. But talk we must about MSNBC. Now Comcast is actually spinning off all of its cable properties. It's not just MSNBC. It's the Golf Channel, Sci-Fi, USA network. They're going to spin all of them off. They decided that they don't want to be in the cable business anymore, which is amazing because Comcast is a cable provider. But apparently that market is going flat, and possibly because people are just cutting the cable, getting rid of the box sort of thing. possibly because there's just not a lot of growth there. But MSNBC is one of the things that are going into they're going into a spinoff that they've decided to call SpinCo. And I guess if you're going to put MSNBC into a new company, SpinCo is probably the right name to give it. SpinCo is the name that this is going to go into, and they're going to offer it up as a for investment, basically a public offering, and it's going to include all these cable properties. But MSNBC is the one that's really in the glare right now, and in large part because they're melting down. And we're gonna get into a couple things that they've said about this, but they're melting down. Their audience has just absolutely disappeared since election night, and some of that is the normal, disappointment after an election loss, because it's a very partisan audience, and when partisans lose and lose unexpectedly, they tend to want to get away from politics for a while, and that's understandable. And usually these things bounce back when you start getting into more controversies, but it's not happening yet. And I don't know that it's going to happen. And that is definitely going to make a big difference to investors when this thing goes out for an IPO. And SpinCo might be spinning for a while looking for a buyer if MSNBC is the hot property that's in this. What's not hot stuff is apparently MSNBC. It's going to be on the market here along with some other cable channels that Comcast wants to spin off into a new entity called SpinCo. We were talking about this briefly in the previous segment. There's a lot of consternation at MSNBC over this, and understandably so. Look, MSNBC was originally conceived as a sort of a data-driven news auxiliary for NBC News, right? Microsoft was their partner. MS is Microsoft and MSNBC. And this was, the original incarnation actually lasted for a little while, where before they decided to just put progressive politics at the center of it and market to a niche audience. And the problem with the niche audience is that if the niche gets too nichey, you suddenly don't have a lot of viewers. And then if you lead that niche down a primrose path in an election cycle, you run the risk of alienating the audience. And right now, there's all sorts of different dramas that are going on here. I think it was earlier this week or over the previous weekend, the one show that actually sort of reacted rationally to this, and I know they got a lot of flack from across the board about this, but Morning Joe actually decided that maybe we should start thinking about reorienting ourselves towards reality, and they went up to pay a visit to Donald Trump at Mar-a-Lago, and oh man, their contributors just went nuts on this thing. This is before Comcast announced that they were definitely going to spin their cable channels off into SpinCo. It's been rumored for a while that this was going to happen, but even before the election, there was talk about doing this. And they got pilloried for it, and I think rightly so, because, Joe Scarborough and Mika Brzezinski, I've been on their show before a couple of times. They're nice folks. They've treated me well, but they really went 110% in with the hysteria, especially in the last several months of this election cycle, about how Donald Trump was going to personally murder everybody on the planet. So that type of hysteria. And then they went and met with Donald Trump immediately afterwards. And what National Review's Jeffrey Blahar said was they went to kneel before Zod, which is exactly what it looked like. But honestly, that was at least a rational reaction. It's like, look, this is going to be the reality for the next 4 years. We're supposed to be part of a news organization. We should really at least have try to build some sort of access back into this world that is clearly now part of the majority of where Americans are, and they got pilloried for it. So when you are looking at that, you're looking at these types of reactions, and you have to think that investors looking at this and going, is this even salvageable? And let's go to cut number 8, Joe Scarborough and Mika Brzezinski talking about that very thing earlier this week.
Right, time now for a look at some of the other stories making headlines this morning. Comcast, which owns our parent company, NBC Universal, plans to spin off its cable TV networks. That's according to the Wall Street Journal and people familiar with the situation. The company will separate off entertainment and news channels, including MSNBC, CNBC, USA, Oxygen, E, Sci-Fi, and the Golf Channel.
So it's spinning off.
The new cable venture will reportedly have an ownership structure that mirrors Comcast's. Comcast spokesperson declined to comment.
So, Willie, as you look at the screen right there, the big concern that stockholders right now on Wall Street are wondering about before they decide what to do with Comcast shares is whether Mika is going to have to give up her penthouse perch atop the Comcast
First
building.
thought I had,
Since
too.
I
What
never had
happens
it.
to the When are we going to get invited to the penthouse?
Never. They never let up. I will say really quickly on this, you know, a Drudge at the top said, oh, like news meltdown, all this other stuff. I mean, I could be completely wrong. We could all be fired a year from now or whenever this happens. You never know what's going to happen.
Or tomorrow.
But in this case, though, Willie, what they're doing is what other media firms are doing. You spin off the cable channels, which 7 years ago were making a ton of money. Now they've got to figure out how to make them profitable.
Well, yeah. In order to be profitable, you have to kind of go into this with your audience intact. The problem is not that MSNBC had too much audience. The problem is that MSNBC wasn't getting enough audience. They weren't getting enough the right kind of audience. And now their audience has been, half of their audience is left, at least temporarily, right? And it could just be temporary. But even prior to the election, they were struggling on this point. They weren't making the kind of revenue that Comcast needed out of this, which is the reason why they're spinning them off. And those problems are going to be, at MSNBC, those problems are going to be even worse because apparently, as the New York Post reported last night, NBC News is basically going to wash their hands of this. And when you look at MSNBC's lineup, it is heavy on, at least their contributor lineup, not necessarily their host lineup, but their contributor lineup is heavy on NBC personnel, NBC News personnel. They bring in a lot of NBC News personnel as contributors, people who are reporting the news, people who are analyzing the news. And it says, staff fearing looming layoffs were peppering Mark Lazarus, who's the NBC Universal chair, about the questions about if the network will need to change its names, logos, and headquarters after reports surfaced that the new entity could be cut off from the reporting muscle of NBC News. And Lazarus told me he wasn't sure, which is sort of an interesting position to take at a point in time when the spinoff has already been announced. And part of that, I think, part of the, well, I'm not sure, is investors are going to want to know whether or not NBC News is going to continue to affiliate itself with MSNBC, at least on some sort of basis. You know, maybe a paid basis, maybe it's a contractual thing, maybe it's a licensing basis that the spinoff can use to use NBC News and NBC News personnel. I mean, generally speaking, when you have contributors who are just, you know, one-off guests, you don't pay them. But if you've got contributors, you're paying them. And that's all been internal at Comcast because it was one big happy NBC Universal family. And if you have to start paying contributors more to cut across now broken corporate lines, that's also going to be an investor question. It's not just a personnel question. That's an investor question. And this spinoff apparently is going to be put in front of investors fairly soon. Those are questions that have to be answered. And so when you're looking at this, you got to look at the value of what's left. What's left? What value is left of MSNBC, not just in its current state, but a state in which it's cut off from those NBC resources or where it has to pay more to access those NBC resources. That brings us to Bill O'Reilly's comment to Chris Cuomo earlier this week as well. Let's go to cut number 7.
Comcast said, you two, we're going to have to try to mend some cliche fences, and you two are going to go in there and you're going to try to tamp it down. Because Comcast knew the next day they were going to announce that MSNBC is vapor. That is a huge meteor story.
Why is
Enormous.
it vapor? Just because they're
There is
spinning it
no
off
more-
and putting them in the... Well, they're spinning off a bunch
There's
of
no
brands.
spin-off.
There is. It's a
No,
spin-off company.
There's no spin-off. See, you buy the propaganda, Cuomo.
Oh, okay.
See what I mean about
I'm just
smart
saying what's
people?
being reported.
All right.
But what do you know?
Yeah, I know, but why would you believe what's being reported? You want the real story? Here
Yes,
it comes.
please.
So they're uncoupling their word, Comcast, MSNBC from NBC News. That means MSNBC has no resources at all. None. They're not going to be able to pay these people millions of dollars, Rachel Maddow, whatever she's making. NBC News is saying, we don't want you around. Why? Because NBC News' numbers, Lester Holt and the Today Show, are catastrophe because half the country equates NBC News with MSNBC and they won't watch. So NBC is desperately trying to save the mothership of information, and they have to throw MSNBC overboard. They're not putting anything into MSNBC. They want to sell it. So where's Georgie Soros now? Georgie's buying radio stations. You can get MSNBC for nothing. They'll give it to you. They don't want any more of this. Why? Because it's hateful. Not because it's so far left. The whole NBC Comcast hierarchy is far left. But it's hateful. They hate Trump. They hate people who vote for Trump. Everybody knows that. And you know what's next? The View. ABC News is going to have to cut ties with The View. And you saw that today or yesterday when Sonny Hostin had to read a legal statement in the middle of a segment. The lawyers get Whoopi Goldberg's ear and it said, we're bringing a statement in on a teleprompter. She reads it. So it is over for these far left networks. Done, never coming back. Dracula's stake in the heart. Who benefits? News Nation may, but CNN, which is on the ropes too, will probably get some MSNBC viewers.
Wow.
There you
well,
go.
I think that's probably a fair assessment, right? I mean, that's, but I'm not sure it's dead. I'm not sure that model is dead. What I'm sure of, though, is that you're not going to get a whole lot of investors that are going to buy up MSNBC. And I think Bill O'Reilly's right about that. I think this is just I think that MSNBC is the freebie that's coming along with the Golf Channel, Sci-Fi, and USA Network. I mean, I think and it's not even a freebie because there's a lot of cost associated with running a 24/7, cable channel. I don't know that they're going to be able to cover the cost of that. And that's, again, another reason why investors are going to take a really hard look at SpinCo. Joining us to discuss what's happening in Ukraine is former Senator Jim Talent. And Senator Talent, I think that there is a real concern here that the United States, and specifically Joe Biden, is escalating this war at as sort of a last-ditch effort to get something out of his presidency, some sort of foreign policy win, and it's getting very, very dangerous here in the last few weeks of his presidency.
And I think it's just another example of the incoherence of Biden's policy. I mean, that's what I would attribute it to, because there is no logic that justifies giving ATACMS or permitting the Ukrainians to use ATACMS to attack Russia that would not have justified doing it a year and a half ago. I mean, this is just the classic kind of inconsistency. And he did the same thing with the F-16s, with the tanks. And it's one of the major factors we have for the war going on so long with a stalemated battlefield. So I think it's pretty clear, in my view, what Trump is going to do. He's going to get in office and he's going to use carrots and sticks to get both sides to the table with a view towards a deal that gives Russia a little more territory in Ukraine and gives Ukraine a guaranteed border going forward and help in rebuilding the country. That's the logical outcome. And I think the man who wrote The Art of the Deal is going to seek that. And the issue is going to be getting Putin to agree. And I think Trump has already said that he's going to tell Putin, if you don't agree, you're going to experience costs and consequences such as you have not experienced before. And there's a lot of options that he can use to impose those. But yes, this policy, this incoherent and inconsistent policy has led to a long war that's really benefited nobody. I wrote a year and a half ago that we needed to seek a negotiated solution, and I think Trump will do that.
Well, and Senator Talent, I mean, look, nobody wants to reward Russia for invading Ukraine. They've done it twice, right? In 2014, and in 20. Well, yeah, more than twice. But in the context of the current conflict, Senator Talent, I mean, this is the type of thing that you go into if you want to stop that from happening, or if you want to have a policy that is going to discourage that. It has to be a consistent policy, and it has to be consistently applied. This is something, I mean, Nate Silver was writing about this yesterday. It's almost as though, it's not even almost as though, Senator Talent, nobody's really sure who's in charge here. It's so inconsistent. It cuts against everything that Joe Biden has been saying up until this point in time, that you have to wonder, is he the guy making those decisions? And if he is he competent to do it?
Well, at this point, and normally I wouldn't say it because I would not want to suggest that to our adversaries that we have a president who's not in control. But you saw the speech he gave in the Amazon the other day.
Yes.
I mean, it's just hard to believe that he is effectively controlling things behind the scenes. But look, I think Putin is going to try and get whatever additional territory he can get before Trump gets into office, because that's going to strengthen Putin's hand at the negotiating table. And I think Putin knows in the back of his mind that now he's going to have to negotiate. I mean, we're all speculating, but I don't think this is all that difficult. I mean, which is why Trump has been saying, I'm going to be able to end this, because again, the Russian state has been degraded. Sweden and Finland are now in NATO. This has been a strategic loss for Putin. And I think he probably wants to get out on terms that don't make that loss worse. I think Trump realizes that. And I think he's going to apply, again, classic carrots and sticks to him to get a negotiated settlement, which is going to benefit everybody, including Ukraine. Now, whether it will work or not, I don't know, but the Trump administration was pretty good at that sort of thing in the first term. So, I'm reasonably hopeful anyway. But no, we can't do this by continuing to send these signals that we're going to support them, we're not going to support them. She loves me, she loves me not. That's what we've been doing for 2.5 years. That's going to end in 2 months.
Exactly. And look, I mean, I think you're right about trying to escalate these things before some sort of settlement. It's exactly what we saw at the end of World War I, right? Is that, everybody knew that the armistice was coming, so they were fighting for that last, inch of ground, so that when it finally went to the negotiators in Versailles, that they could claim the territory that they still held. We got about 30 seconds. I'm going to give you the last word, Senator Talent.
Yeah, I mean, again, the other actors in this, Zelensky and Putin, they're acting rationally in terms of how they have defined their country's interests. I don't like how Putin's defined his country's interests. Nobody does, but he's acting rationally to achieve that. And I think Trump has defined our interests as getting a reasonable deal, which will include, I think, rebuilding Ukraine, although I think Trump is going to make the Europeans pay for it, and they should pay for it, along with guaranteed borders and stability in Eastern Europe going forward. If we can get that result, that'll be good for the United States.
It's a glorious day, and it's a glorious day for the Second Amendment. And here to discuss that with me is my friend Cam Edwards, managing editor of BearingArms.com, and my frequent podcasting partner on Town Hall's VIP Gold series. And Cam, great to talk to you again. Love doing this. And tell me, how is it looking for the Second Amendment over the last 2 weeks to you? Because it's looking pretty good to me.
It is looking pretty good. Now we have yet to see who Trump will name as ATF director, which I think there are a lot of gun owners who are paying very close attention as to who that might be. But yeah, I mean, you've seen the gun control groups sort of set back on their heels, right? They're talking about how we're not giving up the fight. We're going to keep going. But, just at the base level, I think the threat for things like a ban on so-called assault weapons passing through Congress is next to none. We're looking at I think the rollback of a lot of Joe Biden's executive actions that were aimed at gun owners, right? And so I think that this is a really good time. And then, the Supreme Court is actually going to be considering a challenge to Maryland's ban on so-called assault weapons here in just a few weeks. So hopefully we'll get some good news from the Supreme Court, and we'll have a major Second Amendment case coming up in the next term.
I think we got some good news from Gallup, too, although Tom Knighton has a pretty good analysis of how Gallup still is not really asking these questions properly. But Gallup is showing that the demands for a handgun ban are at its lowest levels, I think, since they've been measuring that particular question. And support for the ban on so-called assault weapons is also dropping, which I think is kind of interesting. It's been dropping among Democrats of late.
Well, I think part of that is because you're seeing more Democrats embrace their Second Amendment rights, which frankly, I'm glad to see. I would love it if the Second Amendment truly was a nonpartisan issue. And when I got a chance to go to the voting booth, I could choose between two pro-Second Amendment candidates. That has not been the case for many election cycles, as you well know, Ed. So, if this was a wake-up call for Democrats, too, that, okay, you know what, we really can't win rural America. We're losing even suburban America because of the types of anti-gun and anti-Second Amendment policies that we're supporting. I think that would be a great thing. I'm not convinced that that is the case yet, but if you think about the support for a ban on semi-automatic firearms dropping, that makes sense, right? I mean, these guns are used in a handful of crimes. Granted, a lot of them are very high-profile crimes, but they're owned by tens of millions of Americans for lawful purposes, including self-defense, hunting, recreational shooting. And if the Supreme Court has said, listen, you can't ban handguns, which are the most popular weapon of choice for both criminals and law-abiding citizens, why would we be able to ban the most popular and common rifles in the country without violating the Constitution?
Indeed. I completely agree with you. I mean, when you look at the statistics on this, and I've pointed this out for years and years, and you guys do a great job of staying on top of these statistics, even as the statistics actually tend to degrade over years because they're not collecting them the same way, they're not organizing them the same way. But the data is very, very clear that long-barreled semi-automatic weapons are a very small part of homicides of all types, even justifiable homicides. It's usually the handguns, and so none of this is rational. There's no rationality to this. This is it's being based on fear, and so. I'm encouraged by that. Let's talk about what the administration might do over the next 4 years. You mentioned the ATF director. If they could get one confirmed, I think that would be a win in and of itself. I mean, I'm not even sure. When was the last time we actually confirmed an ATF director? Did that actually happen in the Biden administration? Usually we just go through a series of acting directors.
No, Steve Dettelbach, who's the current ATF director, he was confirmed. Now, he was Biden's second choice. Biden originally nominated a guy named David Chipman, who is a former ATF agent turned gun control activist. He was actually working for Giffords, the gun control group, when he was nominated by Biden. And his nomination was scuttled. Democrats like Joe Manchin and Angus King, I guess, an independent who caucuses with Democrats, refused to support Chipman's nomination, so it was pulled, and then Dettelbach was offered up as the second choice, and he was confirmed. I think that you will be able to get an ATF nominee from Trump confirmed. It depends on who that nominee is. When Trump was in office before, he originally nominated a guy named Chuck Canterbury to head up the ATF. He was with the Fraternal Order of Police, and that was not a pick that went well with the Second Amendment advocates. And so ultimately Canterbury was not able to get confirmed. But I think that hopefully Trump has, learned a little bit from that past experience, and we're going to get an ATF director who is not going to view the firearms industry or gun owners as the enemy, is not interested in using his office to advance gun control, and actually, get back to prosecuting gun traffickers, straw buyers, those folks who are aiding and abetting violent criminals in this country.
One of the big issues, I think, that Second Amendment advocates are going to be pressing in this administration is one that they were pressing in the previous administration, the previous Trump administration, which is national carry permit reciprocity, right? I mean, ideally what they would like is constitutional carry in all 50 states, but that may be something down the road a bit. But what they would like to get is at least national reciprocity, where states had to honor carry permits in the same way that they honor driver's licenses from other states. That's something that's been percolating for a while now. Now, Congress didn't shift all that much. The Senate has got enough seats in the Senate to at least take that up. It could be subject, of course, to a filibuster because a filibuster applies to legislation. But at least you can put it on the floor. Are you optimistic about something like that proceeding over the next 4 years?
I am cautiously optimistic, and I'll give you one big reason why. Back in 2009, I believe it was, John Thune tried to include a national right to carry reciprocity bill in an appropriations. I think it was a defense appropriations bill. It did not succeed. But if we're going to see national right to carry reciprocity passed, as you say, if the filibuster remains in place in the Senate, I don't think the 60 votes are there. I think there is a majority in the Senate to pass that, but it probably would be included as part of a budget bill, right? Something that just takes 51 votes.
Right.
We've already seen Senator Thune is supportive of that, or at least has been in the past. So if that is the vehicle for national right to carry reciprocity, then I think we stand a really good chance of seeing that pass. And you're right, this is a big issue for gun owners, because what other right stops at our state line? If I go to California, my First Amendment rights are intact. My Fourth Amendment rights are intact. So why do I suddenly lose my right to keep and bear arms when I visit LA or San Francisco or a city like New York City, for that matter? It makes no sense whatsoever. And this, I think, would be a reasonable step towards ensuring that our Second Amendment rights don't disappear just when we visit another state.
Right. And the benefit of having a Republican majority is you can actually get that on the floor. Right now, you can't even get that on the floor because the Democrats control the Senate. You could get it on the floor in the House, but you wouldn't be able to get it on the floor in the Senate. So that's one thing that we should be able to see in the first 2 years is passage of that. And you're right. I mean, I've traveled by car, and where my destination is doesn't allow reciprocity from my permit in Texas, but almost every state along the way does. But I can't really carry my pistol with me because once I cross that last state line, suddenly I am in violation of the law. And look, I honor the law. I mean, I respect the law. That's the way it's set up, and I will abide by that law. But you're right. That is a constitutional right, and I'm being denied a constitutional right on the basis of just crossing a state line. And that is very strange indeed, and I hope that Congress does address that. We've got about maybe a minute or two left. What's coming up for you today at Bearing Arms?
Well, I tell you, so we're going to be talking with Mike Sedini from the group Walk the Talk America. The holidays are a time where a lot of us have very stressful experiences, right? We know that the rates of self-harm tend to go up this time of year. So Walk the Talk America is a group comprised of gun owners and Second Amendment advocates who are trying to, foster a conversation about mental health, not involving red flag laws, not involving these government mandates, but basically self-care, right? Helping gun owners, manage their mental health and kind of destigmatize seeking treatment when it's needed. So I'm going to be talking with Mike Sedini about that. But then we're also taking a look at some of the local anti-gun restrictions that are being passed and pushed by Democrats around the country. There's a number of things happening in places like Jackson County, Missouri, Montgomery, Alabama. So we're going to be delving into those issues at Bearing Arms today as well.
On the other hand, sometimes the other party just, advertises for you. And that brings us to Representative Jasmine Crockett. I guess this was yesterday, Dwayne, in the House Oversight Committee, giving her argument for continued Republican control of the House of Representatives. Let's go to cut number 3.
Is because you can then misuse words like oppression. There has been no oppression for the white man in this country. You tell me which white men were dragged out of their homes. You tell me which one of them got dragged all the way across an ocean and told that you are going to go and work. We are going to steal your wives. We are going to rape your wives. That didn't happen. That is oppression. We didn't ask to be here. We're not the same migrants that y'all constantly come up against. We didn't run away from home. We were stolen. So yeah, we are going to sit here and be offended when you want to sit here and act like, and don't let it escape you that it is white men on this side of the aisle telling us, people of color on this side of the aisle, that y'all are the ones being oppressed, that y'all are the ones that are being harmed.
Jasmine Crockett, by the way, was born in 1981. Jasmine Crockett is an attorney elected to the House of Representatives. I don't think she's been oppressed. I don't think she was dragged across an ocean.
Jasmine Crockett went to an all-girls Catholic high school, private high school.
Did she? I didn't know that.
Yeah.
I did not know that.
So, I don't think she's been oppressed. I don't think she personally has.
I think that is I think that's a great ad for at least in Texas here. She's from South Dallas County, and I suspect that South Dallas County that might play. It might play in South Dallas County, but I'm not even sure it plays there. That's pretty out there, even for I would have guessed maybe Austin. Frankly, I would have guessed Austin or maybe Houston. South Dallas County, not quite so much here in Texas, but we'll see. We'll see if she gets reelected on that rhetoric. Just to close the loop a little bit on that, I just took a little stroll through the Wikipedia page, and it says Crockett was born in St. Louis, Missouri, and attended Mary Institute and St. Louis Country Day School and Rosati Kane, an all-girls Catholic high school in St. Louis. So Dwayne was correct about that. She graduated from Rhodes College in 2003 with a Bachelor of Arts in Business Administration. She later attended the University of Houston Law Center, graduating in 2006 with a Juris Doctor. Crockett is a member of the National Bar Association as well as the Dallas Black Criminal Bar Association. Very oppressed. You know who was actually oppressed in the immigration sense? Because that was the sense in which this was brought up, apparently. You know who was very oppressed? Laken Riley. Laken Riley was oppressed to death by illegal immigrants that were let in by Joe Biden throwing open the border. Yesterday, the perpetrator of that crime, his last name is Ibarra, I believe his first name is Jose, was convicted of the crime. He was actually convicted on 10 counts, some of which were dual counts and had to be dispensed with at sentencing. And I don't know if you noticed this, Dwayne, but I listened to the sentencing on that, and
yeah.
This was going on at about the same time, roughly the same time that the Susan Smith parole hearing was going on, which I was also watching because that was a national news story when it happened, right, in 1990, 1991.
Right.
And Susan Smith, of course, is the woman who murdered her two infant, or one was a toddler, one was an infant, sons, by pushing the car into a lake and standing there for 6 minutes while it sunk, and then blamed a black man for some random black man for that
horrible
crime.
Human being.
Just a horrible human being. She's been a horrible human being in prison too. But she was up for parole because when the jury was given the option of life sentence or the death sentence, they weren't apparently told that life sentence would carry with it the possibility of parole. So they had to assemble everybody, all the victims of this woman, to come to the hearing yesterday to testify as to what an awful person she is and what an awful crime this was and all the harm it did to the community. And fortunately, they reached the right conclusion, which was unanimously voted against parole. And Susan Smith is there, and she's crying about how she's found God, and she's served enough time. She never really even mentioned the victims, right? Never even mentioned her two sons that she killed. She's talking about herself, which is, maybe partly the format of these hearings are partly to blame for that. So I just thought it was interesting that the judge, perhaps with a view to that, did not impose the death penalty, but made every single sentence on every single count that applied. And again, because a couple of these were duplicative, he had to drop them for statutory reasons. He had to drop them from the sentencing. But every single sentence that he assigned to the counts that remained are consecutive. So there's no way this guy's ever, even if they start changing, life without parole type of things, and the Supreme Court at some point says, well, you can't do that. This guy's going to have to serve like multiple consecutive life sentences, he's never going to get out, which is the way to handle that. But Ibarra was sentenced yesterday. And I think first I want to go to cut number 1, where Tom Homan, who's the incoming border czar, was talking with Fox News' Laura Ingraham.
The monster, right? The monster that is Tom Homan, the inhumane Tom Homan that the left tries to paint him off to be, right?
Right. This is a guy who's going to be dealing with these issues and dealing with them decisively, apparently, according to Tom Homan. And he's explaining that people really need to understand what Laken Riley went through in the 18 minutes it took to kill her. This is cut number 1.
You know, Laura, a lot of people ask me why I get so emotional when I do Fox News and why I scream at members of Congress. Because I've seen so much tragedy. I've talked to hundreds of angels and moms and dads who buried their children because they're killed by illegal alien. This is the latest. You know, I've talked to little girls as young as 9 years old that were raped multiple times by members of cartel. When you look in her eyes and everything innocent and pure has been ripped from her soul, and her life will never be the same. I mean, it's just I'm tired of it. And the government failed the Laken Riley family. Not only if President Trump was president, he'd be sitting in Mexico in the Remain in Mexico program. And if he did get to New York and he was arrested for injury to a child in New York, ICE would be able to arrest him because the priorities under Trump were if you're in the country illegally, you're a target. But because Secretary Mayorkas put the priorities so low, even the injury to the child didn't meet the standards, so ICE could even place a detainer on him. So this is purely, it could have been prevented. This young lady's dead, and I want every mayor, every governor of a sanctuary jurisdiction to listen to that tape, listen to this young girl fight for her life, fight for her breath, trying to survive, terrified. I want you to understand what she went through. Like the 9-year-old boy, the 5-year-old boy in the back of the tractor trailer that I held, I found him dead, baked to death. I thought about what the last hour of his life was like. You need to listen to this tape. And for those governors and mayors that are saying they're going to stop Tom Homan, they're going to stop President Trump, shame on you. Your responsibility is protect your communities, and that's what we want to do, is protect your community. You know, Laura, a lot of people ask me why.
That's exactly what this is about. And that's exactly what a border is about. A border exists to protect communities, right? I mean, that's what a border is supposed to be for. There is nothing illegitimate about a national border and securing a national border. It's there to protect the communities within the nation. That is one of the basic obligations of any government, is to protect its own borders and to protect its communities. If you're not doing that, there's not much point in having a government at all. And that's the problem, is that we've gotten away from that. The idea of government has changed somewhat in certain circles, and protecting communities is no longer part of that. Protecting special interests is of more interest to those people. Now, with that said, the media did a great job of reporting on the sentencing yesterday of Ibarra. I am obviously kidding about that. Let's go to ABC News to find out how long it took for them to go from this guy killed a teenage, I believe she was a teenager, young woman, to it's all Trump's fault. Get your stopwatches ready for cut number 2.
This death of Laken Riley and the subsequent trial has essentially been a massive political lightning rod here in this country. And you said it there yourself, the president-elect campaigning on the death of Laken Riley and pointing to the current administration, saying that their laws and what they're calling failed policies contributed to Laken Riley's death. I want to remind you that Ibarra entered this country illegally in 2022, according to law enforcement officials, and he was paroled and released for further processing by ICE. And since that time he entered the country, he was arrested another time. Law enforcement officers saying that he was arrested in 2023 in New York City and charged with acting in a manner to injure a child less than 17, as well as a motor vehicle violation. But it's important to note that although there is very little evidence indicating a connection between immigration and violent crime. This is still something the President-elect Trump, several Republicans on the Hill wanted to essentially plant their flag on and point that to the current Biden administration. And we saw that even as early as President Biden's latest State of the Union address, where Georgia Representative Marjorie Taylor...
Let's stop this right here. He's basically making Trump's argument for him. He entered the country illegally in 2022. He'd been arrested at least a couple of times prior to Laken Riley's murder. And ICE didn't do anything about it.
But gosh darn if Trump didn't seize and pounce on the issue all year long.
Oh my gosh. Let's not focus on the fact that, ICE didn't do its job, and it didn't do its job because of the policies, the explicit policies that Joe Biden and Kamala Harris put in place in terms of not interfering and not intervening in these cases, and the sanctuary city policies by mayors and governors that try to lock ICE out of these types of situations. That's the reason why Laken Riley is dead. It's not that, oh, we just missed this guy coming across the border. We were trying to secure the border. He just happened to slip through, and then he murdered Laken Riley. That would be bad, but, I mean, nothing's perfect. They had multiple opportunities to get this guy and kick him out of the country. They didn't do it, and Laken Riley is dead because of that, and that is because of Joe Biden's policies. And what does ABC News do? They put somebody on there to blame Trump for pointing it out. I mean, I don't know how you can miss the moment any more than that. That is absurd. It's an absurd take on what happened to Laken Riley. It's an absurd take on what happened yesterday. Thank goodness the judge in that case was a lot more in tune with what actually happened and made sure that this guy was never, ever, ever going to get out of prison, ever, ever, ever. At least to the best of his abilities, he made sure of that, so good on him. Joining me right now is Josh Kraushaar. He is from JewishInsider.com, editor-in-chief there, and the news today from Europe is from the International Criminal Court. They have issued warrants for the arrest of Benjamin Netanyahu and Yoav Gallant, which is absurd, but is going to be a problem. It could cause trouble for Israel in terms of just diplomatic issues. I mean, I don't think anybody's seriously thinking that they're going to arrest either one of these two guys. But Josh, what is this all about?
Well, look, this is sort of the kind of backwards morality that you see from these international institutions like the United Nations and the International Criminal Court, where it seems like they care a lot more about Israel's conduct of its war in defense of itself against Hamas and Hezbollah terrorism than it cares about the terrorists themselves. And this warrant, by the way, this is not a huge surprise because the court's prosecutor had sought the warrants back in May, but the Biden administration, a whole lot of lawmakers, Democrats and Republicans alike, reacted furiously against that news, and were trying to essentially push back against the ICC, but they went through ahead with issuing the arrest warrants against Prime Minister Netanyahu in Israel and former Defense Minister Yoav Gallant, who, by the way, is sort of the more moderate figure. He's no longer the defense minister. He actually disagreed with Netanyahu on some of the national security policy. He's seen as more of a pragmatist, more of a moderate in the Israeli cabinet, but he is also named in these warrants. You're seeing already pushback from the incoming Trump administration. The National Security Advisor for Donald Trump, Mike Waltz, issued a scathing statement saying that when Trump takes office, there's going to be a strong reaction against the ICC, against the United Nations in response. But this is logistically, Ed, it makes it challenging, I think, for Netanyahu to travel to any countries that are signatories to the ICC, namely a lot of the countries in Europe. So it's going to be a real challenge, especially going forward. We'll see what happens in terms of the reaction in the U.S. to this arrest warrant, these arrest warrants. But in Israel, it's going to make it a lot harder for Netanyahu to get around and to travel as a result.
Josh, what is first off, does the U.S. actually provide any funding for the ICC? I know we're not a signatory to it. We were kind of questioning that here off air as to whether or not there's any funding coming from the U.S. And obviously, if there is, that would be the first target. But it looks like there's at least a sanctions package that's being discussed against the ICC as a result of this. What's the status? What's the status of our relationship there, and what's the status of this sanctions package?
Yeah, I don't think we provide funding. The U.S. is not a signatory to the ICC, but Europe, all the most of the major countries, if not all of them, in Europe are, as well as a lot of other Western countries. Uh, Look, we're already hearing from Senate Republicans on Twitter within the last 15 minutes that sanctions are coming against the ICC. I think there's going to be legislative proposals in Congress, even in the lame duck potentially, to sanction or punish the ICC for its overreach and its focus on targeting a country defending itself against terrorism, as opposed to actually dealing with really malign actors in the world.
Well, I'm glad you brought up the lame duck session because, I guess this would be a test to see how bipartisan the support for Israel actually is. I mean, Democrats really tried to make Benjamin Netanyahu into the villain here over the last several months. Will they now turn around and defend him after seeing the election results and how little that strategy actually availed them in the election? I'm not sure if Josh heard the question. Josh, I mean,
Yeah,
what do you think that the what do you think the prospects of
Yeah, no, I heard
bipartisan
you.
action in the lame duck session would be? Okay.
Yeah, so I was going to say that one of the votes that took place in the Senate last night was a Bernie Sanders-led resolution to withhold aid from Israel. And 19 Democrats, like I said, it failed, but 19 Democratic senators voted for these measures. This is sort of the divisions right now within the Democratic Party. You have Joe Biden, you have Chuck Schumer, you have sort of the mainstream majority that have continued to be in support of Israel, but then you have this left wing faction that's, if anything, growing. If this vote is any indication, and that's going to be a preview of some of these Democratic divisions to come with the Trump administration.
And Josh, what else? I mean, we got about 30 seconds. What else do you have coming up today at JewishInsider.com?
Well, we're getting feedback, reaction, fast and furious from the Trump administration, from lawmakers on the Hill to this ICC decision. We're also looking at some of the Democrats who voted against providing aid to Israel, voting to withhold the aid. So surprise, Raphael Warnock. These are purple state senators who, in the case of Ossoff, up for re-election in 2026. So there are a lot of political dynamics taking place on the issue of Israel as well, and we're going to be reporting into all the details at Jewish Insider.
Name him and shame him. Name him and shame him. That's what I say. Josh Kroshauer, JewishInsider.com. Thank you so much.